You're not handling things correctly. You must depart, old hag, because we are now going to live together. We'll cover living expenses with $1,700. My sister Margot grinned. My husband Raphael, who had been quiet up until this point, replied, "Oh, is that okay? Then good luck with the living expenditures of $7,000. He gave a jovial laugh. What? $7,000? Margot was obviously unable to conceal her bewilderment. She apparently didn't understand why the sum increased from $1,700 to $7,000. Look at this, Raphael said with a smile, and held up a comprehensive statement to Margot and the others, outlining the $7,000 in spending. Margot and the others went pale when they saw the details. However, we said, "Well, we'll be leaving then," and let them handle it. Then we walked out of the house. I'm 37 years old, and my name is Penny. Raphael and I have been wed for 13 years. We both work, and we recently purchased a new home near our place of employment, where we currently reside. My sister Margot and I grew up in the rented flat where my parents had been residing up until this point. I have a lot of recollections from that apartment. But the apartment is falling disrepair and will be demolished in 6 months. Raphael made the suggestion, "It's going to be hard for your parents to find a new place now. While we were searching for a new place after my parents were forced to move out, they should surely move in with us if they believe it's a good idea because we have a spare room." There has always been concern about my parents' ability to act swiftly in an emergency because they are already over 70. Therefore, I found Raphael's suggestion to live together to be rather comforting. Being the second son, Raphael may have been especially excited about my parents moving in with us because his parents already live with his older brother's family. I was so grateful to Raphael at the moment, and my parents gladly accepted our decision to live together. My parents consulted us while they were getting ready to move into their new house. We're considering asking Margot and her pals to assist us with our move. Is that acceptable? As it happens, when my parents discussed the move with Margot, she said, "Mark and I will help out." My parents were first hesitant to accept, but Margot convinced them. I felt a range of emotions as I heard this. Actually, this was the first time Margot and her husband Mark have visited since I acquired my new home. They reside in an apartment only a 15-minute train ride away. I had mentioned the new house to Margot at first, but I hadn't gone into specifics. The explanation was that, beginning 5 years ago, they had been having financial difficulties and frequently turned to me for assistance. Margot abruptly called one day and announced, "I've decided to get married." Since our relationship was normal at the time, I genuinely said, "Congratulations. How does he seem?" "His name is Mark, and he's very charming," remarked Margot, who was a little bashful but joyful. "He wants me to take care of the house while he works as a carpenter." But after that, Margot's perspective started to slowly shift. She began requesting money. "Big sister, I'm very sorry, but would you mind lending me $500? We're low on living expenses because of the recent heavy rains and Mark's inability to work. I'll reimburse you when I get paid again. Please assist." She started to inquire nearly every month. I made a casual loan to her at first, but I have since ceased. Margot has never reimbursed me, which is the reason. Margot recently accused me angrily of being stingy after I turned down another of her pleas for money. "Isn't that only $500? You should be able to afford it because you work for a large corporation. Take action to support your sister who is having difficulties." I'm worried that Margot might want more money when she visits my home. The reason for this is because my house is rather large, so it wouldn't be shocking if Margot thought we had money. I was looking forward to the day my parents moved in, yet I spent my days filled with anxiety. Then the scheduled Sunday for my parents' move arrived. I was nervous, waiting for the arrival of my parents, Margot, and her husband. That day, Raphael was suddenly called into work, so he wasn't at home. As a result, I had to welcome them by myself. After a while, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Margot was standing there holding our mother's suitcase, saying, "Sis, the luggage is heavy. Hurry up and open the door." Then she added, "Wow, what a big house. It looks so grand. I'm envious." Mark, with a somewhat condescending tone, said, "Penny, don't just stand there. Let us in." He was carrying a small chest of drawers, clearly struggling with it. "Sure, please come in," I replied. In this way, I welcomed Margot and her husband into my home. When Margot was shown the bedroom designated for our parents, she murmured in a low voice, "This is your parents' room? It's bigger than my apartment. Is it really okay for them to have such a big room?" Ungrateful, but Mom asked modestly, while Dad seemed a bit confused as he gazed around. I assured my parents they weren't imposing on us, saying, "We weren't really using this room." In fact, this room was originally intended as a child's room. However, my husband and I have been busy and haven't been proactive about having children for 13 years. That's why we decided to offer this unused room to my parents. "Huh, you could have lent it to me. You're still stingy, sis," Margot commented while organizing our parents' luggage. Eventually, the moving process for my parents was completed in about 2 hours. This was because they had disposed of most of their belongings. All the appliances were picked up by recycling companies, and the proceeds were given to Margot and her husband as a token of gratitude for their help. Clothes and other small items were given away to neighbors or disposed of. Thus, the room my parents moved into was spacious enough to accommodate all their belongings. "Margot, Mark, thank you," my mother expressed her gratitude. As Margot nodded to my mother's words, she turned to speak to me. "Would it be okay if I come to visit occasionally? Since our family home is gone, I want to see Mom and Dad," Margot said. Indeed, the apartment where my parents previously lived had been terminated. Given Margot's desire to see our mother, there was no particular reason to deny her visits, so I replied, "Of course, that's fine. However, I'm quite busy with work, so I won't have much time available." "No problem. Thank you." Margot expressed her gratitude. After that, Margot started visiting about once a week. Curiously, Mark often came along as well. Although Mark was supposed to be at work, he sometimes visited on weekdays, and my mother happily reported, "Today, Mark has come along too." Since Margot and Mark's visits increased, troubling issues have arisen at home. Things started going missing. Every time I opened the refrigerator or cabinets, I noticed that food and household items were dwindling. Initially, it was just vegetables and toilet paper disappearing. Gradually, however, more expensive items started vanishing, like the premium ham my husband received from his boss as a mid-year gift and cosmetics I bought at the department store. At first, I thought perhaps my mother was using them, but she said she wasn't involved. "I haven't touched anything," she stated plainly. "Really?" "It's becoming troublesome, especially since recently, it's only the expensive items that are disappearing," I complained. My father responded, "Okay, I understand. I'll also keep an eye out. Please, let's not cause any more trouble." I quietly told my parents, but after that, Margot stopped responding to my emails, and our household items continued to disappear, increasing my frustration. 3 months passed, and my patience reached its limit. The disappearance of Raphael's personal belongings and mine continued. Recently, a high-end brand wallet I gave to Raphael for his birthday went missing. Margot or Mark is most likely the culprit. This is clearly theft. Margot has recently been coming to our house frequently on weekdays when we are not around. Even if I replenish the food, it disappears by the next day, and maintaining our food stock has become a challenge. To address this, Raphael and I decided to take a day off work and have a serious talk with Margot to stop her from coming to our house any further. On the day of action, we pretended to go to work as usual, but hid nearby our house, waiting for Margot and Mark to arrive. About an hour later, Margot and Mark appeared. "Isn't Mark supposed to be working?" Raphael muttered to me, but I couldn't answer, as I didn't know the details. Just 5 minutes after Margot and Mark entered the house, we returned home. "I'm back," I said as we entered, and Margot appeared, looking startled. "Why are you here, big sis? It's a weekday, isn't it? Aren't you supposed to be at work? And Raphael is here too?" Margot was clearly flustered. "I took the day off because we need to talk to you, Margot," I explained confidently. Mark and my parents rushed to the entrance, looking surprised. I glanced at Mark and said calmly, "Since you're here too, Mark, it's good timing. We came here to tell both of you not to come to our house ever again." Upon hearing this, Margot suddenly became furious and retorted, "What are you talking about? I come here during the day to keep Mom and Dad company while you're away. If you need to talk to Mom and Dad, you can do so at a nearby cafe. It's within walking distance for them," I suggested calmly. "It costs money to talk at a cafe. I don't have that kind of extra money," Margot snapped back irritably. With a deep sigh, I responded, "So that's why things are disappearing from our house. You've been stealing them, haven't you? I really feel like calling the police." Raphael nodded in agreement and added, "I can't find the birthday wallet that Penny gave me. I was planning to switch it out on my next day off. Can we get it back soon?" Mark was clearly panicking and exclaimed, "We're family, aren't we? Why are you doubting us?" "There's no doubt that Mark stole Raphael's wallet," I declared firmly, yet calmly to them. "Leave this house right now. If you never set foot here again, we can forget this incident ever happened. But from now on, we're cutting ties with you, Margot. Goodbye. I no longer want to be involved with those who steal." Although it's painful to admit we don't have evidence of past thefts, there's nothing else to be done but to let it go. Nevertheless, Margot and her husband were not ready to accept this. "So I won't be able to see Mom anymore? You villains!" Margot shouted at me angrily. I then offered an alternative. "How about you live with Mom and Dad? Then you can be their companion every day, but remember, you'll need at least $1,700 a month for living expenses." I doubted Margot and Mark could afford that amount. However, as the argument escalated, Margot became defiant. "You're not taking care of things properly. We're going to live together now, so you old hag need to leave. We'll pay $1,700 for living expenses," Margot said with a grin. Raphael, who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. "Oh, is that so? Then good luck managing the $7,000 in living expenses." He laughed brightly. "What? $7,000? Margot was visibly confused. She didn't understand why the amount had jumped from $1,700 to $7,000. Smiling, Raphael said, "Look at this," and showed them a detailed statement that explained the $7,000 expenses. Seeing the details, Margot and Mark paled, but we left them to it, saying, "Well, we'll be leaving then." We then left the house and headed to a nearby hotel. As soon as we entered the room, we both collapsed from exhaustion. The tension of the situation had drained us both too much. "I'm really tired today. Sorry for putting you through this, Raphael," I said. Even though it was still before noon, I felt extremely exhausted. It seemed like common sense didn't apply to Margot or my mother, and their excessive behavior still left me feeling unsettled. Raphael said, "You must be even more tired, Penny. Margot is unreasonable, but your mother-in-law is quite unusual too." It seemed like Mom was turning a blind eye to Margot and Mark's thievery, and she stayed silent during the recent argument. Perhaps Mom believes that she and Margot have done nothing wrong. Maybe she doesn't even recognize the theft as such because it's a family matter. Mom has always favored Margot, which is why she always prioritizes her requests. I was always focused on my studies and didn't bond much with Mom. I studied hard with the goal of getting into a top university. Thanks to my efforts, I was accepted into my first choice and later secured a job at a major company. On the other hand, Margot neglected her studies and was more interested in chatting and playing with Mom. As a result, she only managed to get into a mediocre university and struggled with job hunting. Margot was only hired as a contract employee, not a full-time one. However, it seems that for Mom, the less clever the child, the dearer they are. Mom always favored Margot, even making a distinction between our birthday presents. What should we do now? It's almost like we've been robbed of our home, Raphael asked timidly. It seems he feels unable to take any drastic action because Margot and Mom are his family. But for me, forgiving Margot and Mom is out of the question. Of course we will fight this thoroughly, I answered resolutely. I explained the situation to Raphael calmly. Raphael nodded silently. Having been insulted to this extent, I resolved not to remain silent. I decided to sever my relationship with Mom, just like I did with Margot. Later in the afternoon, we headed to a local law office. A few days later, we returned home with a lawyer. When we rang the doorbell, Margot answered. "Hi, what big sis? What do you want now?" "I have something to discuss about the house. Please gather everyone in the living room," I asked Margot. "Why do I have to do that? It's such a hassle," Margot said, sounding annoyed. "Hurry up. We won't leave unless you do. We have a lawyer with us," I said sternly. "Okay, fine," Margot responded, clearly rattled by the presence of the lawyer, and hurried off to call Mark and our parents. Eventually, everyone gathered in the living room, which was messy and littered with candy wrappers everywhere. We had cleaned the house thoroughly before we left, but it was clear that no one had touched it since. "So, what's this about?" "I don't really have anything to say," Margot started reluctantly. "Did you come to take back the house? We're living here now, so it's impossible," Mark said to me with a smile. Mom also spoke to me. "Penny, you and Raphael have moved out, right? I prefer to continue living here with Margot and Mark. They keep me company and it's fun being with them. Being with you always made me feel like I had to be on my best behavior, which was exhausting," she said with a wry smile. Knowing that Mom saw me that way hurt a little. What was all the time we spent together for if it felt empty? From her remarks, I decided to cut off my feelings for Mom. "Raphael and I don't mind leaving this place at all," I replied. "Yeah, maybe we didn't need this big house after all," Raphael continued. "If that's the case." Margot suddenly brightened up. Mark and my parents also looked visibly pleased. Seeing their reactions, I delivered the final word. "However, there's a condition. You guys will have to buy the house," I said. Margot's face fell. "What? You mean the mortgage details we paid before you left? $5,300 a month? Are you joking?" Margot objected to the amount, but the price was fair. The house is located near the center of town, just a 5-minute walk from the station, and features a spacious 4-bedroom layout. Thus, Raphael and I understood its value and had taken out a mortgage, making monthly payments. The reason for the $5,300 monthly payment was to reduce the total payment amount by paying off the mortgage sooner. The decision to opt for a shorter mortgage term to reduce interest had increased the monthly burden. "It doesn't matter if you all don't agree. Raphael and I co-own this house, so if you want to continue living here, you'll need to buy it from us now." "Please proceed, counselor," I said, handing over to our lawyer. The lawyer nodded confidently and told Margot and her family, "Here is the sales contract. Please check the amount, and we will need your signatures." Their expressions changed as they looked at the documents. "Why is the selling price $1,500,000? This is a rip-off!" Margot exclaimed, trembling. However, this amount was calculated based on the remaining mortgage and was quite reasonable considering the market value of the area. As the lawyer explained the details, Margot and Mark's faces grew increasingly pale. "This is impossible. We can't afford this," Margot said, shaking. My parents were also astonished. They probably hadn't realized the house was worth so much. "If you can't pay, then why have you been squatting here forever? I thought you wanted to stay and were planning to buy it. Now please sign, Margot. You can take out a mortgage to cover it, right?" I pressed. Trembling, Margot apologized. "I'm sorry. I was just envious knowing you lived in such a nice house. I didn't think it through." Mark also muttered slowly, "I'm sorry, but even if I work every day of the year, I wouldn't be able to earn that kind of money." Mom suggested to Dad, "We can't afford this high amount. Maybe it would be better if Penny and Raphael live with us. We can eat delicious meals together." Dad looked distressed. I stated firmly, "Raphael and I have no intention of living with you." After being betrayed once, we plan to live our lives on our own from now on. We are also cutting ties with you, so please understand. I declared this to my parents. From now on, I would have no dealings with Margot or my parents. At that moment, Mom exclaimed in shock, "What do you mean, cutting ties?" "Then who will give us our allowance?" she asked. Dad also looked pale. "What do you mean by allowance?" Margot asked, standing up and confronting her mother. In fact, in addition to the $1,700 for living expenses, we used to give Mom and Dad an allowance of about $2,000 a month. It had decreased a bit since we started living together, I replied. Margot was shocked, exclaiming, "Then $7,000 isn't nearly enough. How can you afford to give out so much money?" Mark was also stunned. "That's because Raphael and I work at a major corporation and have decent incomes. It would be impossible alone, but together we manage," I explained. Shocked by the disparity in income, Margot collapsed to the floor. "But from now on, I won't have any dealings with you or Mom. It's your turn to take care of our parents," I said calmly with a smile. Margot and our parents' faces went pale with shock. Since then, the discussion of selling the house to Margot disappeared. I had anticipated that Margot and our parents wouldn't have the funds. Instead, Margot, Mark, and my parents were forced to leave our house. With the lawyer involved, they moved out more smoothly than expected. Margot and the others complained that living in such a big house was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, but that was irrelevant to me. "Isn't your apartment lease still active? I'll send all of Mom and Dad's belongings there," I told her. Afterward, I arranged for movers to transport our parents' belongings to Margot's apartment. The apartment was quite small, and it was unclear if all the belongings would fit, but that was no longer my concern. I instructed the movers to have Margot pay all the moving expenses, considering this as compensation for the inconvenience Raphael and I faced. It was quite inexpensive. Even after they moved out, Margot occasionally contacted us. "Big sis, I'm really sorry. Can you take our parents back? They're wasting so much money and we can't cover the living expenses. Plus, their pensions are used for entertainment. Mark is very upset too. Can you do something?" she pleaded desperately. Currently, it seems our parents are living in Margot's apartment. Living together in such a cramped space must be incredibly difficult for the four of them. The fact that our parents were frivolous spenders had become clear after they started living with us, often squandering their pensions on their favorite indulgences. My mother loved luxury brands, and my father was obsessed with alcohol and gambling. Given this, their wasteful spending was somewhat predictable. "You were the one who decided to live with them, right? I'm not involved anymore. We've cut ties thanks to you. Taking care of them. We've had more financial leeway since we stopped giving them allowances," I told Margot. Margot responded, "That's awful. I'm struggling financially so much. Mark has brought up divorce. I need to find a job." Hearing her cry over the phone and knowing how desperate she was made me feel a strange sense of satisfaction. "Then find a job. I don't want to be involved anymore. Goodbye," I said, and hung up the phone. Since then, my mother has also contacted me several times, asking to live with us again. But I have no intention of complying. Penny, please forgive me. It's hard living in Margot's cramped apartment. The cheap meals aren't satisfying, and I really miss your cooking. Can I pack up and come back home soon? I remained firm in my stance. Mother, you chose to live with Margot. That's none of my concern now. I won't help you anymore. You are practically strangers to me. I'm busy preparing seafood paella right now. I'll be hanging up soon. By the way, seafood paella was your favorite, wasn't it? I'll enjoy it, including your portion. With those words, I ended the call. My mother must surely be regretting her choices now. 3 years have passed, and Raphael and I continue to live our lives unchanged. There have been times when Margot or my mother visited, and I had to call the police. But lately, it has been peaceful. Ultimately, both Margot and my mother chose divorce. Mark and my father distanced themselves from them, understanding that this would allow them a more peaceful life. Margot, who has been dedicated to her family and lacks income or job experience, finds job hunting extremely difficult. My mother, who has been a homemaker for many years, only receives a small pension. It's clear that having such financially burdened people around makes it impossible to sustain a stable life. Thus, Mark and my father chose divorce and distanced themselves from Margot and my mother to achieve a better quality of life. While Mark and my father have managed to escape the immediate problems, they haven't completely evaded the consequences of their decisions. After splitting from Margot, Mark tried to return to his sporadic carpentry work, but it hasn't been going well. He faces cold treatment from other craftsmen and is harshly utilized, which doesn't bode well for him. With no experience outside of carpentry, transitioning to another field presents a challenging path. It seems he will have to continue facing these difficulties as he works. After divorcing my mother, my father has been wandering from one relative's house to another, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. At 73, finding and affording a rental property is a daunting task, and it seems he will continue to live in constrained circumstances. The reasons for the divorces in the family were made starkly clear when Margot and my mother dramatically announced their separations. My mother's excessive spending worsened her marital relationship, while Margot's divorce was due to an affair. Their financial desperation became evident when Margot and my mother came begging to be let back into the house. We hardly have any income between the two of us, so we're behind on rent and about to be evicted from our apartment. Please let us stay with you. As Margot began her plea, my mother also desperately shouted, "Help us!" I don't mind if it's just me. Let me at least have some seafood. It wouldn't be fair just to help Mom. At that moment, I had to call the police. Margot and my mother argued fiercely in front of our house. It's likely their personalities will never change. With the police involved, visits from Margot and my mother finally ceased, which was a relief. Since then, my life has taken a significant and joyful turn. I became miraculously pregnant. Now, with my belly quite large, walking has become increasingly difficult. I've taken maternity leave, planning to extend it into parental leave until our child turns 1. Though we were worried about what might happen, we need to work even harder now for our child. Raphael expressed his renewed commitment. Yes. From now on, it's about the 3 of us pulling together. I agreed, sharing a laugh with Raphael. Though I've cut ties with Margot and my parents, I have Raphael and our unborn child. Moving forward, we plan to cherish the family we have right in front of us, not just those bound by blood. I truly believe this from the bottom of my heart.